I saw him with my own eyes. He was like something from out of my nightmares. A creature from hell with large horns and a glowing spine. His kingdom beneath the soil. A demon conjuring the dead.
What is up, everyone? It is Area of Effect with another out-of-the-box build, out of nowhere. Where in the heck have I been? Been 4 months since my last post. Listen, a lot of you guys have been asking. I am alive and well. I had to move the family, have been working kind of remotely out of town. That dust is about to settle. I've been getting back on more and more the last month, doing some scribing, doing some farming, touching up some builds, and I have a lineup for next patch. This Necromancer is going to be part of it. It is going to be way better next patch. I cannot wait for that. Check out the Siphon build. Let's check out the stat screen. Look at the weapon and spell damage. Great penetration, excellent recoveries, over 31,000 max health. Resistances aren't bad. This is the other bar, the dual wield bar. We're Inferno Staff, dual wield, and we'll break that down. We've got the Jewels of Misrule for our food. We want to grab that max health and those recoveries. You could use Orzorga's Smoked Bear Haunch. It's just a lot more expensive. Our Mundus is the Atronach for that extra Magicka recovery. And we are a Vampire Stage 3. Now, next patch, you could probably do away with it. I'll have to check out and see whether or not I'm going to keep Vampirism or not for that new damage mitigation stat. It'll be 10%. But anyhow, check into the vampire updates. But we are a orc. I love the orc on this build. We get that brawny passive for extra max stam, 1,000. We got the unflinching rage passive, increases our max health by 1,000. That doubles up nicely with the Necromancer max health passive. And when you deal damage, you heal for almost 2,200 health. That's every 4 seconds. A constant damage that you do returns back as healing. That's great for a Siphon build. And then weapon and spell damage by 258, and almost most importantly, the reduced cost of sprint and the movement speed bonus of sprint by 10%. A lot of mobility on this build. Let's jump into the gear. There are 2 options. We've got the Overwhelming Inferno Staff. This is our first 5-piece set. This one, option 1, is with a charge trait staff and a poison glyph. But as you read, when you deal damage with the class ability, you surround yourself with a torrent, dealing basically 1,200 shock damage to all enemies within 8 meters of you every second for 6 seconds. 0 counts as a tick, so you'll get 7 ticks from it, okay? All enemies around you, and you get 15% of the damage dealt back to you as Magicka. There's 3 targets here. Do you see the shocking tether? Not the blue, the light blue one that's steady, but the blinking one. That is Overwhelming Surge. And it's getting buffed by our second set, which we will go into. This build is like a double and triple dip into what I think just makes it so optimal. But you have options we could do. As you see, I have more than one Inferno Staff. Sharpened. As a matter of fact, I believe the stat screen that I displayed was the sharpened stat screen with the Berserker glyph, okay? But I like to use... and I realized this after playing and testing the charge trait with the poison damage glyph, and I'll go into why. It is absolutely insane. But real quick, so I'm fair, this is the charge trait Inferno Staff, 9270 penetration and 3809 weapon and spell damage, so it dropped a little bit, but we're going to make up for that with Sundered and a couple of other things with damage. But before we get into the double dipping aspect, I've got to add one more thing to the table. Malabeth the Scourgers, that's our monster set, another max health. When you take damage, you have a 10% chance to tether yourself to the enemy for 6 seconds. It's going to be 7 ticks of this. And while you're tethered, you deal magic damage, almost 1,200 every second, but you also heal for the damage, okay? So you're kind of siphoning it away. And you get Major Vitality, which is going to be great. There's the tether. 1149 to the alligator, and we get that back. As you see, it was 1231. So the value we got was a little bit more than the damage. That's because of the vitality. But anyway, check out the tether, siphoning them down. You've also got Overwhelming Surge, zapping each one of them, and the tether to the ground. We'll get into that on the skills portion later. But what am I talking about double and triple dipping into these sets? Well, with Draugr, our second 5-piece set. And when I tell you guys this, it's nuts. It's going to blow your mind. And to be completely honest, I already understated immensely by saying double and triple dip, because we're going to quadruple and then some dip, especially with all the status effects we'll get into in just a minute, and why we're using the charge trait with the poison glyph and all that jazz. But anyway, continue on through the gear. and you will see how we are set up. We've got stamina glyphs on all of these for the recoveries. There's a big reason for that. But let's go ahead and look at the back bar. We're using the Master's dual wield, obviously with that rending slashes, but take a look at not only the traits. Well, let's talk about the rending slashes. You'll deal, when I buff up, like 700 more damage to the rending slashes skill. And that rending slashes skill also will heal you when it deals damage. But Draugr going to add damage to it. The Master's dual wield is going to add damage to it per tick. We got a charge trait. Look at the glyphs: physical damage, magic damage. And we obviously get resources back for both of those. One of those is charged. But why do we want physical and why do we want magic? We could use a double dot poison. It does add a dot, and Draugr does great with that. But let me break this down as to why we are using this charge trait with the poison glyph over the sharpened with the berserker glyph. All right, check this, the squares above the enemy's head. See all the squares? Those are status effects. Certain debuffs, sometimes damage over times, but mostly and often on this build, status effects. They may last 4 seconds. Let me pause it here. Take a look at these icons and their timers. All right, so real quick, if you look below the squares, look at the orange numbers that are fading out of the screen, overlaid with tons of dots. Look at the 13,058 big bursty damage, and look at the force pulse bouncing around to all these other enemies. Okay, because that's the morph we use. If they have status effects, it'll bounce. But look at the symbols above this guy's head. Okay, especially the primary target. But they're all affected with status effects. And I'll pause it again. Look at all these, and I'll break these down. What we're looking at. But they're constantly getting basically every status effect in the game. And these status effects, especially when they're dots, are not only being buffed by the Inferno Staff and the Necromancer passive, but also Draugr. Every one of them. And what are they? Physical, which gives them the Sundered, which deals damage up front, applies Minor Breach for 4 seconds, reducing their armor by almost 3,000, and then gives you the Sundered buff, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 100 for 4 seconds. Poisoned, which deals damage over time, 31% of your weapon and spell damage over 4 seconds, and acts as an execute that scales higher the lower health they get, and Draugr is going to apply to that. Diseased, Minor Defile for 4 seconds, reduces healing taken and effectiveness of damage shields, and once every 4 seconds it will explode. All of this is going to deal more damage because of Draugr. Bleed, which applies the hemorrhaging status effect, 3.6 of max stam and 34% of your weapon and spell damage is bleed damage over 4 seconds, but it can stack up to 3 times, with each stack increasing its damage by 25%. This one's really cool because that's going to really scale that up. And if you look at these percentages that they're using, you can only get them so high, infinitesimally or very minimally larger, based on increasing your weapon and spell damage. Because look at that scaling with that percentage. But Draugr throws a whopping 300 and something plus on each one of those. That's a huge cheat to scale these way up beyond what the spell and weapon damage could. And what's crazy, this same concept applies to Overwhelming Surge and Malabeth the Scourger's monster set, where Overwhelming Surge deals way more damage, so you get way more magicka back from it. And Malabeth the Scourger deals way more damage, so you get way more healing from it. If I went too fast, you can go back and read these and what all they do, but we are getting all of these on this build, and that charge trait takes them the extra mile, and that Draugr scales them up for free. And as we move into the skills section, I will kind of point out a little more clearly where we're getting what when it comes to all these status effects. So another great thing to look at while talking about Draugr is how else we can get the most out of it. With Force Pulse, we deal Flame, Frost, and Shock damage. This doesn't just apply one instance of Draugr, it applies 3. You get that additional Draugr buff to each of the Flame, Frost, and Shock damage, triple dipping. This next skill, Dazing Soul, offers us a damage up front, a stun that we don't have on this build unless we want to use those stupid skeleton hands, and it deals Oblivion damage. So we even have Oblivion damage type, and it's going to give us also our Major Sorcery, Major Brutality, our spell and weapon damage buff, which I think is a great skill because as a Necromancer, you don't have access to Major Sorcery and Major Brutality, and you don't have great access to a quick, simple stun. This skill gives us both. Now, onto the blast bones. You could use the one that blasts into you and increases your damage over time by 15%, which sounds pretty great on a build like this, but honestly, I just can't get away from the big bursty AoE of the blighted blast bones, and also it's going to give them the diseased status effect for 4 seconds that we went over earlier, another status effect on the enemy. The next skill that Draugr really going to make a difference on is Blood Craze. I kept saying Rending Slashes earlier, but Blood Craze, bleed damage up front, bleed damage over time, also heals you over time, and Draugr going to buff that. The Master's Dual Wield is going to buff that. Next one, Mystic Siphon. This one ticks every half second. So this is insane. Draugr is going to tick on this every half second. So it really takes this to the next level. And this does so much for us passively as well. 150 health, magicka, and stamina recovery while siphoning. While slotted, damage taken is increased by 3%. And I love this coming next patch. That's going to be the source of our Major Prophecy and Major Savagery for our crit, which is going to free up a skill slot. We'll get into that later in the video. But I'll say it now that it's going to offer us the ability to slot our Expunge, Cleanse, or if you wanted to, Mist Form, which is going to deal damage around you when you come out, and also for the damage you deal, you get healing. So there are 2 passives that really scale our damage up. One is a Necromancer passive, Rapid Rot, increase your damage over time by 10%. And the other one is on the Destruction Staff. Well, first, when you fully charge heavy attack with the Destruction Staff, you add another damage over time. But Ancient Knowledge, increase your damage done with damage over times and status effects by 12%. So many dots on this build and so many status effects. The Elemental Force passive is going to kind of work like our charge trait, helping us apply those more frequently. So with these skills and sets being on a Necromancer wielding an Inferno Staff, seems to make a lot of sense with those passives. Now, I know we already went through a skills kind of section where I touched on specific skills and Draugr. We'll take another look here at something, because next patch, things are going to change. We have Expert Hunter slotted. You'll see this in the PvP clips for that extra crit. We're not going to need to do that come next patch, because the Tether Mystic Siphon is going to offer us Major Prophecy and Major Savagery. This is awesome because it's going to free up that slot on the other bar, and in that slot we can either put our Cleanse, which we don't have presently, which will get rid of 4 dots or 4 negative effects, or if you're a vampire, you can put on Mist Form, and one of those morphs deals damage around you and heals you for that damage, so Draugr will scale that up. But some other things to keep in mind, we're getting our Major Brutality and Major Sorcery from this skill. We might not need to do that next patch, because maybe you want to slot the Skeletal Mage. That's going to give you Major Sorcery and Major Brutality. And instead of the Major Sorcery and Brutality on Dazing Soul, you can put another affix script on that scribed skill. But either way, I will definitely be keeping the Stun from a scribed skill. Another thing to keep in mind is Resolving Vigor is our source of Minor Resolve and Minor Ward on this build. We're going to get that automatically from our Summoner's Armor, Major Resolve and Major Ward skill that we're already using. And it's going to go from 20 seconds to 30 seconds. So you'll get Major and Minor Resolve from that skill. That's insane. So maybe you can put something else in the place of Resolving Vigor. 2 other quick things I missed while speaking about that was the skill Resistant Flesh. That's our big juicy heal. It's a big bursty heal, and you'll get the heal value, and then that value will turn into resistances, making you a lot thicker with the armor. And then the other skill is the Blast Bones. I like to send the one out that applies a disease status effect and blows up and causes an AoE. If you want to do the dot, the 15% more damage over time damage, by all means, go ahead. Now, real quick, Azure Blight Jack, that was what was exploding in the background. I am going to feature an option here in place of Draugr. This skill is exploited by these 2 sets. It's not supposed to work this way, and it does. It's the only reason why I'm showing it. Overwhelming Surge, as you can see, I put the tether behind me so it's not hitting these guys. Only Overwhelming Surge is hitting them, and look at the stacks above their head. 13, 14. That's an Azure Blight stack. When you get 20 stacks, it explodes to itself and all enemies around. And each person, each enemy has their own ticker of this. So if you really load them up like you know we already do, I've already explained it on this build, there's lots of dots, then those are going to explode all the time. But it's not supposed to be that a proc set can proc a proc set. But Overwhelming Surge does cause a stack, and it's every second. 7 stacks from it, okay? And Malabeth the Scourger, when you take damage and that tether starts, and I'll show this, it adds a stack of Azure Blight. So your AoEs around you, your Blood Craze, your Mystic Siphon, which adds a stack every half second, that's insane, because there's not a lot of half second tick dots. This is one of them on a Necromancer. Overwhelming Surge, the Mystic Siphon, Blood Craze are damage over time. That's our major sorcery. What is it? Dazing Soul. The AoE of our Inferno Staff ultimate. The AoE of our Goliath transformation ultimate. All the dots and all that's exploding, and it's just insane. You look at right here. See, there's Malabeth the Scourger above the crocodile. You see the tick below his name there in his health bar. You got to take damage to have it proc. There, it's procking. Now look at the ticks stacking up. That is from Malabeth. That's a proc set, and you shouldn't be able to proc a proc set with a proc set. So with Overwhelming Surge and Malabeth the Scourger and all the dots and status effects, we are just flying through stacks. But of course here I'm just going slower to show the progression and the explosions. Insane. That's an option if you want. I didn't go with that option on this build, but I did keep that in mind, and I have something else I'm working on. Keep your eyes open. All right, so the skills on the two-handed dual wield bar. Blood Craze. We already kind of went over this. You deal damage up front. It deals a damage over time, and it heals you for every tick. You can have multiple instances, by the way, of this skill on 3 different enemies, and every time you deal damage or get a tick from that dot, you'll be healed. That works well with our two-handed Masters dual wield combo, and Draugr buffs that as well. Like I said a few minutes ago, we're getting Minor Resolve and Minor Ward from Resolving Vigor. We won't have to do that next patch because we're going to get that from Summoner's Armor. So we're going to switch something around there. The other skill is the Spirit Guardian, which is also getting a big buff next patch. As you see now, it heals you or the lowest health ally every 2 seconds. Well, now it's going to heal you and 2 additional allies with each tick of its heal, which is great because sometimes it's like picking either you or them, and now you can be a little more selfish and sustainable with it, and also be more supportive for more than one person on your team. Mystic Siphon, we've already talked about this a lot. Don't need to go into it again, but I guess you could use the other Morph Ward Explodes if you want, the disease one. Summoner's Armor, we talked about this one as well briefly. Major Resolve, Major Ward, reduces the cost of our summons, but next patch it's going to go up to 30 seconds, and it's going to give us Minor Resolve and Minor Ward as well as Major Resolve and Major Ward. So that's pretty nice. And then the last thing, the ultimate, we talked about it. Damage around you, refills your max health, gets you out of a pinch, and it's a dot, so it's going to add stacks if you're using the Azure Blight, but it's also going to heal. If you're using Draugr, the dot's going to be heavier, and the heal from the dot is going to be more potent as well. That's why I love Draugr and this whole idea of Siphon, because scaling up these dots sometimes is tough. You got to invest highly into like weapon and spell damage or max health or whatever corresponding trait, whereas Draugr just automatically, whatever it is, look at all these numbers. Each one of those everywhere is getting 300 and like almost 20 more damage. All right there, look above their heads. Multiply all the additional 300s and you're getting thousands more damage. But we're able to put into max health. We're able to put into recoveries and sustainable type of features to make ourselves more survivable while still kind of getting this damage. And the more we damage, the more we heal. Now let's jump into the champion points now, the blue tree. All right, so the first one, Force of Nature, an additional 660 penetration for every status effect you have. We went over that there was 8 of them. If you even have just 5, you're getting like 3,300 more penetration. There's your sharpened trait right there. And with our charge trait on our staff, like I said, we're getting all these status effects constantly. I passed up Thaumaturge, that's obvious, 6% more damage to damage over time. Occult Overload, if they have status effects, they explode for 5185 damage when they die. They're going to have a status effect fighting us. And then Untamed Aggression, weapon and spell damage by 150. Love that we have the Oblivion damage sourced from there as well, in addition to Dazing Soul. The Red Tree, Boundless Vitality, 1400 max health. That's helping keeping us over 30,000, which I always love to do. Fortified, 1731 armor. One thing on this build, our resistances were a little less than I usually like. But remember, with the resistant flesh heal, the burst heal, you'll get resistances from those numbers, those healing values. Sustained by Suffering and Rejuvenation were both recovery slots. So a lot of recovery. We're like a battery of recovery on this build. Well, that's going to wrap up the CP distribution and this build video. The Siphon build, a Necromancer. Man, I'm telling you, I cannot wait to see this thing next patch. A lot more buffs, so all the power coming our way. If you like this build and you want to see more, head on over to my channel. I've got plenty of content on there. All types of builds, roles, styles, classes, and even some tips and tricks videos that are non-build related. Non-build related. Well, that's it, guys. Leave a like if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends. Leave me a comment of what you would do differently. Non-build related. Thanks for watching.